A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Imagine you are sitting in the cockpit of a multi-million-dollar fighter jet, traveling at twice the speed of sound. Your radar screen is a chaotic mess of symbols. Your radio is buzzing with 3 different conversations, and somewhere out there, in the vast expanse of the sky, is a target. You have a split second to decide if that blip on your screen is an enemy pilot trying to kill you or your wingman who took a wrong turn in the heat of a dogfight. This is the reality of the fog of war, but it is a version of the fog that we do not often talk about. It is not just about the difficulty of seeing the enemy. It is the terrifying difficulty of seeing your own people. The fog of war is usually described as a lack of information, but in the modern age, it is often the exact opposite. It is a crushing weight of too much information, all of it conflicting, all of it arriving at the speed of light, and all of it demanding a life or death decision in the blink of an eye.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you have hit on the core of it, corn. It is the great paradox of modern military history. We have satellites that can read a license plate from space. We have encrypted data links that share information faster than the human brain can even register, and yet we still see these tragic incidents of friendly fire, or what the military calls blue on blue. Our friend and housemate Daniel sent us a prompt today that really gets into the gears of this problem. He wanted us to look at the technical and procedural failures that lead to these moments, specifically focusing on deconfliction and the systems we use to identify friend from foe. It is a question that seems simple on the surface, but once you start peeling back the layers, you realize it touches on everything from the physics of radio waves to the deepest flaws in human psychology.
It is a heavy topic, but an important one. We are living here in Jerusalem, and we see the importance of these systems every single day with the air defense networks and the coordination required in such a crowded airspace. It is not just a theoretical exercise for us. It is about how you prevent the very weapons meant to protect you from becoming a threat to your own forces. So, Herman, where do we even begin with this? Is this primarily a failure of the hardware? Or is it something deeper in the way humans process information under stress? Why is it that the more data we have, the more we seem to struggle with the basic question of who is on our side?
It is both, corn, but to understand the human element, we first have to understand the tools they are working with. The primary tool is called IFF, which stands for Identification Friend or Foe. Now, the name is actually a bit of a misnomer. IFF does not actually identify foes. It only identifies friends who are cooperating with the system. If you do not have a working transponder that speaks the right language, the system does not tell the operator that you are an enemy. It just tells them that you are an unknown. And in a high-stakes combat environment, unknown often gets treated as hostile very quickly. This is the fundamental limitation. It is a cooperative system. It requires both parties to have functioning equipment, the correct cryptographic keys, and the correct settings. If any one of those things is missing, the system defaults to a state of dangerous ambiguity.
That is a crucial distinction. If I am a friendly pilot and my IFF system is damaged by electronic warfare, or just a simple hardware malfunction, I suddenly look exactly like the enemy to my own side. It seems like such a fragile link in the chain. Why is it so difficult to make a system that is more robust? If we can build a jet that can fly at Mach 2, why can we not build a radio that just says, "Hey, it is me. Do not shoot"?
Well, let us look at the physics of how the handshake actually works. It is an interrogator and transponder system. Think of it like a digital secret handshake. An interrogator, which could be on a ground-based radar station or another aircraft, sends out a coded pulse on a specific frequency, usually 1030 megahertz. When a friendly aircraft receives that pulse, its transponder automatically sends back a reply with a specific code on 1090 megahertz. If the code matches what the interrogator expects, the blip on the radar screen changes from a generic symbol to a friendly symbol, but it is not just one pulse, it is a series of pulses. In the older systems like Mode 4, it was a relatively simple challenge and response. But today we are using what is called Mode 5. This is the gold standard for the United States and NATO forces.
And what makes Mode 5 so much better than what came before? I assume it has something to do with the encryption we have talked about in previous episodes.
That is the key. Mode 5 uses advanced cryptographic techniques based on the Advanced Encryption Standard, or AES. It is designed to be extremely difficult to spoof because the codes change constantly. It is not just a static password. It is a time-synced, encrypted challenge and response. The interrogator sends a random number and the transponder has to perform a mathematical operation on that number using a secret key that changes every few hours. If the math is right, the interrogator knows it is a friend. This prevents what we call a replay attack, where an enemy records a friendly signal and tries to play it back later to trick the radar. With Mode 5, that recorded signal would be useless within seconds because the required response would have already changed.
But that reply is a radio signal, right? Which means it can be intercepted, it can be jammed, or it can be spoofed by an adversary who is clever enough. Even with AES, if the enemy can flood the frequency with noise, the handshake never happens.
You are hitting on the physical limitations, and that is why the history of IFF is a constant arms race. Beyond just the encryption, we have to deal with things like fruit and garble. Fruit stands for false replies. Unsynchronized in time. It is basically electronic clutter. When you have dozens of interrogators all shouting at once and hundreds of planes all replying at once, the signals can overlap and become unreadable. Garble is when two aircraft are so close together that their transponder replies physically overlap in the air, making it impossible for the radar to tell them apart. So even if the equipment is working perfectly, the physics of radio propagation can still fail you in a crowded battle space.
So if we have this incredibly secure Mode 5 system, why are we still worried about friendly fire? If the encryption is that good, the handshake should be perfect every time. Is it just a matter of the environment being too noisy?
You would think so, but here's where the reality of the battlefield messes everything up. First, you have the issue of the silent environment. If you are a stealth aircraft like an F-35, you do not want to be screaming your location to everyone in the theater by constantly pinging a transponder. So there is a tension between staying hidden from the enemy and staying visible to your friends. Then you have the issue of latency. In a crowded battle space with hundreds of friendly and enemy assets, the IFFF system can get overwhelmed. If the interrogator is sending out thousands of challenges and trying to process thousands of replies, you get that fruit I mentioned. And this brings us back to that human element. If an operator sees an unknown target closing in at high speed and the IFFF system is lagging or showing fruit, they have a terrifyingly short window to make a decision.
This reminds me of the discussion we had back in episode 7067 about the nervous system of war. We talked about how command and control is basically just managing data flow. But here, the data flow is failing at the most critical moment. I am thinking about the historical cases that really illustrate this. One that always comes up in these discussions is the USS Vincennes incident in 1988. That was a tragedy where a sophisticated Aegis cruiser shot down a civilian airliner, Iran Air Flight 665. That was an IFF failure, right?
It was a catastrophic failure of both technology and human psychology. The Vincennes was equipped with the most advanced radar system in the world at the time. They were in a high-tension environment in the Persian Gulf engaging with Iranian gunboats. When the airliner took off from a nearby airport, it was squawking a civilian IFF code which is called Mode 3. But the crew on the Vincennes misinterpreted the data. They thought they saw the aircraft descending toward them in an attack profile when it was actually ascending on a normal flight path. They also thought they were seeing a military Mode 2 signal, which would have indicated an Iranian F-14 fighter jet.
So, the machine was giving them one set of data, but the humans were seeing what they expected to see because of the stress of the engagement. It sounds like the technology was almost too good, providing so much data that the crew could cherry-pick the bits that fit their fear.
That is the danger. It is called scenario fulfillment. The crew was so primed for an attack that they ignored the data that contradicted their fears. The IFF system was actually working, but the interface and the cognitive load on the operators were so intense that they could not process it correctly. There is another famous case from 1994 over northern Iraq. Two U.S. Air Force F-15 pilots shot down two U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopters. In that case, the IFF systems on the helicopters were working, but the F-15 pilots could not get a friendly return. There were multiple failures in communication between the AWACS control plane and the fighters. The pilots even did a visual flyby, but they misidentified the Black Hawks as Iraqi Hinds. It shows that even when you look with your own eyes, the brain can lie to you if the electronic data is missing or confusing.
That is a chilling thought. Even with the best tech, the brain can just decide to see something else. Now, I want to move from the technical handshake to the broader concept of deconfliction. Because IFF is just one piece of the puzzle. How do militaries manage the entire theater so that people are not even in a position to accidentally shoot at each other? We are talking about things like airspace control orders and air tasking orders. This seems like the procedural safety net that is supposed to catch us when the IFF fails.
Right? This is the procedural side of the house. If IFF is the tactical handshake, deconfliction is the strategic choreography. In a major operation, you have something called the Air Tasking Order, or ATO. This is a massive document. In the first Gulf War, these things were hundreds of pages long and had to be physically flown to aircraft carriers because the data links were not fast enough to transmit them. The ATO tells every single pilot exactly where they are supposed to be, what time they are supposed to be there, and what their mission is. It creates a predictable environment where, in theory, if you see a plane at 20,000 feet over a certain coordinate at 10:15 a.m., you already know it is a friendly B-52 because the schedule says so.
It sounds very rigid, like a giant train schedule for the sky. But war is not a train station. It is chaos.
It is very rigid, and that is the problem. It works great for a planned strike, but the moment the first shot is fired, the plan starts to fall apart. This is where we get into the concept of kill boxes and corridors. To prevent friendly fire, the military carves up the map. They will say, okay, from 10,000 to 20,000 feet in this specific square, only friendly bombers are allowed. Anyone else in that space is assumed to be hostile. This is called positive identification by location. If you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, you are a target.
Right. There were several incidents where Patriot missile batteries engaged friendly aircraft because the aircraft were flying in corridors that the Patriot operators thought were restricted to enemy missiles. The deconfliction procedures were too slow to keep up with the dynamic nature of the movement on the ground. You had the army moving at lightning speed, and the airspace management systems were still trying to catch up. It was a failure of synchronization. The Patriot operators were following their rules of engagement, but the rules were based on outdated information about where friendly planes were supposed to be. It feels like we are trying to manage a four-dimensional problem with two-dimensional tools. You have latitude, longitude, altitude, and time. If any one of those four things is off by a tiny bit, the whole system of deconfliction fails. I'm curious how this has changed as we have moved into the digital age. I know we have talked about sensor fusion before, especially with the F-35. How does that change the game for deconfliction? Are we finally moving past the paper train schedules?
It is a massive leap forward. In the old days, a pilot had to look at a radar screen, listen to the radio, and look out the window to try and piece together who was who. In an F-35, the computer does that work for them. It takes data from the onboard radar, the infrared sensors, the IFF interrogator, and, most importantly, the data links from other friendly units like Link 16. It fuses all of that into a single picture. If another friendly jet 500 miles away sees a target and identifies it as friendly, that information is instantly shared across the entire network. Every pilot in the area sees that target turn green on their display at the same time. This is what we call the common tactical picture.
So we are moving from individual pilots making guesses to a collective consciousness of the battlefield. That sounds like it should solve the problem, but I suspect there is a catch. Does this not just create a new kind of vulnerability? If the network gets hacked, or if there is a single point of failure in the data stream, could you not end up with an entire fleet misidentifying a target? We are trading the pilot's bad eyesight for a potential system-wide glitch.
You hit the nail on the head. We are trading individual human error for systemic network error. If the sensor fusion algorithm has a bug, or if an adversary manages to inject false data into the network, the consequences are magnified. We also have to talk about the cognitive load. Even with sensor fusion, a pilot is still being bombarded with an incredible amount of information. There is a risk of trusting the computer too much. We call it automation bias. If the screen says a target is hostile, the human might not double check it because they have been trained to believe the fused data is infallible. This is a major theme in the training for the next generation of pilots.
It is that balance between trusting the algorithm and trusting your gut. We talked about this in episode 927 when we looked at combat rescue. In those high stakes moments, sometimes the manual, old school methods are the only thing that saves you when the high tech systems fail. If the network goes down, or if you are in a heavily contested electronic warfare environment where the enemy is jamming everything, do these pilots still know how to do manual deconfliction? Or have we forgotten how to read the stars because we have GPS?
That is a major concern for the Pentagon right now. They are realizing that we have become so dependent on the digital handshake that our skills for degraded operations have atrophied. There is a renewed focus on training for what they call DELO, or disconnected, intermittent, and low bandwidth environments. Pilots are practicing how to use visual cues and basic radio procedures again, just in case the fancy sensors are blinded. They are even looking at things like laser communication and directional antennas that are harder to jam than the omnidirectional radio waves used by traditional IFF.
I want to go back to the IFF technical details for a second, because I read something noteworthy about how we are trying to move beyond just radio handshakes. There is work being done on non-cooperative target recognition. Can you explain what that is and how it fits into this? Because if we can identify someone who is not trying to be identified, that changes the whole cooperative nature of the problem.
This is really cool stuff, Korn. Non-cooperative target recognition, or NCTR, is the ability to identify an aircraft without it having to say anything back to you. One way we do this is through something called jet engine modulation. Every jet engine has a unique signature based on the number of blades in the compressor and the speed they are spinning. When a radar pulse hits those spinning blades, it comes back with a very specific modulation. A sophisticated radar can actually look at that return and say, that is not just a generic fighter, that is a MiG-29 because of the way its engine blades are shaped. It is like hearing the difference between a Ferrari and a Ford just by the sound of the engine.
That is incredible. So it is like a digital fingerprint of the machine itself. But I assume that is much harder to do at long ranges or if the target is maneuvering. You need a very clean look at the intake of the engine, right?
It requires a very high-quality radar return and a lot of processing power. It is not a replacement for IFF, but it is an extra layer of confirmation. We are also seeing the use of high-resolution infrared sensors that can identify an aircraft by its heat signature and its physical shape. This is where AI comes in. We are training machine learning models on thousands of hours of footage, so they can recognize the silhouette of an F-15 versus a Su-27 from miles away, even in grainy or dark conditions. The AI can look at the proportions of the wings, the placement of the engines, and the heat bloom from the exhaust to make a high probability identification.
So, we are building a multi-layered defense against friendly fire. You have the cryptographic handshake of Mode 5. You have the sensor fusion of the network. You have the mechanical fingerprint of the engine. And then you have the AI looking at the visual shape. It seems like we are getting closer to a solution, but the battlefield is also getting more complex. I am thinking about drones and autonomous swarms. How on earth do you manage deconfliction when you have thousands of small, cheap drones buzzing around the battlefield? You cannot put a Mode 5 transponder on a drone that costs $500.
That is the million-dollar question. In fact, just a few months ago, in January of 2026, DARPA released an update on their OFFSET program, which stands for Offensive Swarm Enabled Tactics. They are working on decentralized deconfliction protocols. Instead of a central commander trying to track every drone, the drones themselves use a kind of mesh network to talk to each other and coordinate their movements. They basically act like a flock of birds, where each individual knows where its neighbors are, and they move as a collective to avoid collisions or friendly fire. The update in January showed that they have successfully integrated these swarms with manned aircraft, where the swarm automatically clears a path when it detects a friendly jet's IFF signal.
But that only works for the drones within that specific swarm. How does a human pilot in an F-35 know that the swarm he is flying over belongs to his side and not the enemy? If those drones are too small to carry a full Mode 5 IFF transponder, we are back to square one. We are back to the pilot looking at a cloud of dots and having to guess.
That is exactly the challenge. Miniaturizing secure IFF is a huge priority, but there is also a push toward what we call pattern of life analysis. AI can look at the behavior of a swarm. Is it moving toward a friendly base? Is it using radio frequencies that we recognize? Is it following a path that was pre-approved in the air tasking order? By looking at the context, not just the signal, we can make a much better guess about who it belongs to. This is the shift from signal-based identification to behavior-based identification.
This context-aware decision support seems like the real future here. It is not just about a green or red light on a screen. It is about the computer saying, hey, this target is not squawking the right code, but it is coming from a friendly airfield, and it is flying a known mission profile, so maybe hold your fire and double check. It is about giving the human operator the right context to make a better decision. It is about reducing that cognitive load we talked about earlier.
That is the shift. We are moving away from the idea of a magic bullet technology that will solve everything. We are realizing that friendly fire is a systemic problem that requires a systemic solution. It is about better training, better procedures, and better human-machine teaming. We have to design systems that account for the fact that humans are going to be stressed, tired, and scared. The goal is to create a system that is resilient to individual failures. If the IFF fails, the deconfliction procedure should catch it. If the procedure fails, the sensor fusion should catch it. If the sensor fusion fails, the human intuition should be the final backstop.
I think about the ethical weight of this as well. As we move toward more autonomous systems, we are essentially delegating the decision of who is a friend and who is a foe to an algorithm. If an autonomous drone makes a mistake and kills a friendly soldier, who is responsible? Is it the programmer, the commander who deployed it? That is a very different kind of fog of war. It is a fog of accountability.
It is a profound shift. And it is why many of us in the technical community are very cautious about full autonomy in lethal systems. We want the AI to help us identify, but we still want a human to pull the trigger, or at least to have the final veto. But the speed of modern combat is making that harder and harder. If a hypersonic missile is coming at you, you do not have time for a human to review the IFF data and have a committee meeting. You have to trust the system. The decision has to be made in milliseconds, which means the human is effectively out of the loop for the tactical decision, even if they are in the loop for the strategic one.
This brings us back to the point we made in episode 884 about the digital handshake in missile defense. When you are talking about intercepting incoming threats, the speed of the machine is the only thing that matters. But in that speed, the risk of a mistake is always there. It is a constant trade-off between protection and the risk of a tragic error. We are building systems that are faster than our own ability to supervise them.
That's a vital point. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that friendly fire is just a result of incompetence. They see a headline about a blue-on-blue incident and they think, how could they be so stupid? But when you look at the technical reality, the sheer complexity of the electronic environment, you realize it is a miracle that it does not happen more often. Our soldiers, sailors, and airmen are operating in an environment that is designed to be confusing. The enemy is actively trying to make you shoot your own people through electronic deception and physical camouflage.
That is an important point. Electronic warfare is not just about jamming. It is about deception. If I can make my enemy's IFF system think that my planes are friendly, I have won half the battle before a shot is even fired. This is why the move to Mode 5 and the use of AES encryption is so vital. It is about making the cost of deception so high that the enemy cannot afford it. But it is a race that never ends. As soon as we secure one channel, the enemy looks for another vulnerability.
And it is why we, as a country, need to stay ahead of the curve. This is not just a military issue, it is a national security priority. If our allies do not have compatible IFF systems, we cannot fight together effectively. We saw this in various coalition operations where the United States had to slow down or limit its capabilities because our partners were still using older, less secure versions of IFF. Interoperability is the invisible glue of any coalition. If you cannot speak the same digital language, you are a danger to each other.
Interoperability is the invisible glue. I like that. If you cannot speak the same digital language, you are a danger to each other. I am thinking about how this applies to the ground war as well. We have talked a lot about planes, but what about the soldier in a foxhole? They do not have a radar screen. How are we helping them distinguish friend from foe in the chaos of a ground engagement? Is there a ground version of IFF?
Ground deconfliction is actually even harder in many ways. You have terrain, you have buildings, you have civilian populations. The military has tried things like Blue Force trackers, which are basically GPS units that show the location of friendly units on a digital map, but those systems have latency. If the map shows a friendly unit is 100 yards away, but they have actually moved 50 yards closer in the last 30 seconds, you have a problem. We are also seeing the development of soldier-borne sensors, little drones or head-mounted displays that can overlay digital information directly onto the soldier's field of vision.
Imagine looking at a building and seeing a green outline around the windows where your fellow soldiers are located. That kind of augmented reality could be a game changer for preventing friendly fire in urban combat. It takes the abstract data from the Blue Force tracker and puts it right where the soldier is looking. It removes the need to look down at a screen and then back up at the target.
It sounds like science fiction, but we are seeing the prototypes of this right now. It all comes back to that idea of context. The more information we can give the person on the ground, the less likely they are to make a tragic mistake. But again, we have to be careful about information overload. If a soldier has 20 different icons flashing in their field of vision, they might miss the actual enemy standing right in front of them. The design of the user interface is just as important as the accuracy of the sensor.
So, as we look toward the future, do you think friendly fire is a solvable problem? Or is it just an inherent part of the nature of war? Can we ever truly reach zero?
I do not think it will ever be 100% solved as long as humans are involved. War is inherently chaotic, and humans are inherently fallible. But I do believe we can get the risk down to a much lower level. The combination of secure, encrypted IFF-like Mode 5, ubiquitous sensor fusion, and AI-driven decision support is a powerful trifecta. We are moving from a world of uncertainty to a world of high probability identification. We are narrowing the margin of error.
It is about narrowing the margin. We might never get to zero, but every step we take toward better identification is a life saved. I think about the families of those who have been lost to friendly fire. For them, it is not a technical problem or a procedural failure. It is a tragedy that could have been avoided. That is the weight that the people designing these systems carry every day. It is a heavy burden, but it is one that drives the innovation we have talked about today.
That's the reason we spend so much time talking about these details. It is not just because we are nerds who like radio frequencies and encryption algorithms. It is because these things matter in the most literal life and death sense. When we get it right, our people come home. When we get it wrong, the consequences are devastating. This is the core challenge of military operations: how to be lethal to the enemy while being a guardian to your friends.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive, Herman. I feel like I have a much better understanding of why this simple question of friend or foe is actually one of the most complex technical challenges in the world. It is a mix of high-level physics, advanced cryptography, strategic choreography, and the deep, messy reality of human psychology. It is the ultimate test of our ability to manage information under pressure.
It serves as a perfect example of why the work Daniel sends us is so valuable. It forces us to look past the headlines and get into the actual mechanisms of how the world works. This is what we love doing here on My Weird Prompts. We take these complex, often dark topics and try to find the logic and the human story beneath them.
I agree. And before we wrap up, I want to say to everyone listening, if you are finding these deep dives helpful, please take a moment to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It truly makes a difference and helps the show reach more people who are interested in these kinds of topics. We appreciate the support more than we can say. It keeps us digging into these weird prompts.
It really does. And remember, you can find all our past episodes, like the ones we mentioned today about command and control and combat rescue, over at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have a huge archive there that you can search through. There is a lot of foundational stuff there that helps put today's discussion in context.
We will be back next time with another prompt and another deep dive. There is always something new to explore, and we are glad you are on this journey with us. Whether it is the physics of a jet engine or the ethics of an AI, we are going to keep asking the questions that matter.
Until next time, stay curious and keep asking those deep questions. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We will talk to you soon.
Goodbye from Jerusalem.
Take care.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep weird.